I didn't like it, but it didn't stop me playing on it, you know. I just played the way I played. I play emotionally.
Ringo Starr was always the one with the weird insect, who laughed and grinned as John and Paul received all the praise, but at 84, he's planting a surprise bomb behind. That joyful expression belonged to a man who drank a lot of. He attacked his wife while blacked out in a drug-fueled outburst and left his children behind. Even worse, he nearly passed away twice, and his secret health condition was unknown. Crisis to the violent event that. This is the Ringo who forced him into rehab. Fans of the narrative never thought Ringo Starr was. Richard Starkey was born on July 7, 1940, in 9, Madron Street, a modest home in. His parents live in Liverpool's Dingle district. Elsie Glee and senior Richard Starkey. Starkey put forth a lot of effort to support their. His father had been employed at a dock. Prior to becoming a baker, along with his mom, was already working at a bakery. Difficult, but things deteriorated when Ringo's father abandoned the family in 1943. His mother took him on at the age of 3. She worked multiple jobs to support them. As a bartender after working as a maid. She did everything she could to support herself. She constantly guarded her son, keeping an eye on him, particularly as he encountered a series of health issues at. Ringo, age 6, had to have surgery. When treating appendicitis, what ought to have been a normal task evolved into something even worse. He got peritonitis. Harmful infection that proliferated by. He eventually fell into a coma and spent a year at Myrtle recuperating. Children's Street Hospital as he began making up lost time at school. When he was 13, he became unwell and the disease TB killed. This period, hundreds in England each year. After being taken to a sanatorium, he spent 2 years confined to bed. Meant being behind for so long in school, but it also gave him access to something to transform his life to. Keep the kids amused. Music sessions were arranged by hospital workers. Ringo acquired instruments for percussion. Learning how to play the drums using colored dots. And maracas, which he was unaware of at the time. But this marked the start of his passion for playing the drums by the time school seems to have recovered. Crucial, he had overlooked too much and struggled to keep up, dropping at the age of 15. Out without any credentials, as the majority of. He visited working-class boys in Liverpool. He immediately entered the workforce. Many occupations, including a short-term with British Rail prior to obtaining employment as. It was steady for a machinist, but he had no enthusiasm for it. Ringo Starr's path into. In 1957, music began when he and his Eddie Miles, a neighbor, founded the Eddie. The group skiffle that Clayton Skiffle was. At the time, it was present throughout in Britain. A raw blend of jazz and folk blues was performed. People utilized basic tools. Tea chests and washboards as opposed to bass guitars and drums. Ringo discovered his unique method of maintaining rhythm via tapping. The band played a thimble on a washboard. Local performances and immediately became well known. Songs such as Walking and Rock Island Line. They became popular in Liverpool thanks to Kane. Even gave a performance at Cavern Club. Location that would go on to become legendary. Ringo made his debut in the history of the Beatles. Christmas was on July 31, 1957. Ringo's stepfather changed everything. Didn't give him his first drum kit. A bass drum, a snare drum, and a temporary emblem, but it was sufficient there. With a real drummer, the band sounded better. And they became more well-known despite their success. The craze for skiffs was. By the beginning of 1958, American rock and roll was replacing Eddie Clayton. Ringo was left behind when the skiffle group disbanded. In November, looking for his next move, an opportunity presented itself in 1959 when Rory Storm, when a drummer was sought by the Hurricanes, were among the top rock bands in Liverpool and roll bands that are more refined. After joining, professional Ringo quickly took. He adopted a new persona and became Ringo Starr, moniker that was influenced by the rings he constantly wore, as well as his passion for country music. Storm provided him with a unique occasion in there. Star Time is a show where Ringo moved forward to sing, and he did so. Boys by the Cheryl's is one of the tracks that adds to his increasing stage presence. Hurricanes weren't limited to Liverpool. Played everywhere in the early 1960s. They were able to obtain a residence at Wales Butland's holiday camp. They made £25 a week, which was a respectable. By October, their income at the time was playing in Hamburg, Germany, at the Beatles were at the Kaiser Keller Club there as well, but the Hurricanes were there back then. Were the larger band that Ringo initially encountered. George, Paul McCartney, and John Lennon. Harrison occasionally. When Pete Best, the drummer for the Beatles, unable to execute, Ringo filled in one. On October 15, 1960, at night, he recorded John Paul George during the summer, and it was Lou Walters, Rory Storm's bass tee. Ringo's initial performance with the individuals who would eventually become his. The Beatles' bandmates never forgot those. Ringo's drumming stood out on Hamburg nights. His easygoing demeanor fit nicely. Conversely, unsurprisingly, Pete Best found it difficult to relate to the rest of. By the middle of 1962, it was evident that the Best's drumming didn't need a change. Correspond with their changing sound, and their aloof demeanor made everything worse. Opted to take his position on August 15, 1962. Paul McCartney and John Lennon traveled to Pavel Healy from Liverpool to locate Ringo. They offered him £25 weekly to become a member of the Beatles more than at initially he was making with Rory Storm. He paused because he was devoted to the Hurricanes, although he was aware of the Beatles. Something unique, he took the second chance. On August 16, a few days later, Pete Best was. Ringo was officially a Beatle before he was sacked. August 18 was their debut performance at Birkenhead's Hume Hall when Ringo, as the Beatles, Starr took Pete Best's seat. In August 1962, the drummer was anything yet a seamless transition for followers who are devoted to. Pete was incensed at their initial official performance in Hume Hall with Ringo in. The audience chanted, "Pete at Birkenhead. Eternal Ringo never." The reaction was even worse. Half of the Cavern Club. The crowd publicly objected, saying that things became. George Harrison was so hot that. Later that same day, a punch to the eye. Even a bus struck him because of the animosity. Was fierce, but the Beatles remained. Ground that Paul and George had pushed for. Ringo due of his exceptional drumming. And John joined Ringo as well. Previously filled out for Pete and had demonstrated his skill to the gathering. Their dependability throughout the protests. Fans who had faded started to see what Ringo contributed his drums to the group, which had a swing with a looseness that made them. He wasn't ostentatious, but his rock solid. The Beatles playing elevated them to a new level of assurance, even decades later, of Pete Best acknowledged that the choice was warranted. Marked a sea change for Ringo. The band featured its last lineup, and their ascent to worldwide renown was unavoidable. As the Beatles changed, so did Ringo's contribution to Rubber Soul's consistent drumming in 1965 supported the group's transition to folk rock. His beats harmonized with Norwegian wood. George's sitar blends in perfectly with a daring. Then, rock music took a new turn. In Revolver 1966, Ringo performs. Grew much more inventive in his Tomorrow Never features a mesmerizing drum beat. He had never done anything like Nose prior to, and naturally, Yellow Submarine displayed his fun side, which made him fans adore Sgt. even more. The Lonely Hearts Club Band by Pepper, 1967. Among the best albums ever made. Ringo has solidified his position in his drumming on the band's song has a My Friend's small assistance was straightforward, but ideal for creating a consistent groove. Due to his passionate vocal performance, he was no longer only the drummer, he was a crucial component of the band's character. Ringo rarely sang, but when he did, it was Yellow Submarine was a noteworthy. It was written especially for his voice. Was quite enjoyable and light-hearted. Appropriate for his disposition, it turned into an anthem that followers of all ages adored back then. Arrived with some assistance from my friends. A song written just for his voice style. His voice lacked technical brilliance, but it was honest, warm, and relatable. The song was timeless because of its genuineness. Both songs became favorites among fans, demonstrating that Ringo was not simply the man. By the late 1960s, behind the drums, the Beatles had changed as a band. Previously, they had been the oneness that had determined that their childhood was over. Personal conflicts and creative differences and external factors were tearing them apart. Paul McCartney desired to retain the band that specialized in structured pop tunes. John Lennon was approaching experimental music under Yoko Ono's direction. George Harrison had developed into a formidable composer of songs such as Here Comes Something in the Sun, yet he frequently felt ignoring the presence of Yoko Ono in the things became worse at the studio starting in 1968. She never left Lennon's side, although when the band was recording, they had never previously let others in, so this was a significant shift that Ono made. Innovative ideas, and Lennon adopted them. The others believed that she was specifically meddling with Paul McCartney. Considered this to be an issue during the revolution. He said that Lennon had allowed Number 9 to Ono pushes the group toward avant-gardeness. Harrison also had trouble with territory. The change in his relationship with Lennon. Things cooked and weren't the same anymore. Throughout the White Album recording sessions in the studio atmosphere in 1968 was tense. Although everyone felt alone, Ringo Starr took it as hard as he thought the others lived nearer to one another than to him, they were, but in actuality, all of they shared McCartney's sentiments. Criticizing his drumming in particular, even assuming control of the USSR. Ringo sensed it profoundly. He thereafter claimed to have out of it and unwanted, like if he was being abandoned as the others approached. It became so frustrated that it broke. And worn out, he left the group while the remaining Beatles members suffered without. After escaping to Sardinia, Ringo was inspired to write Octopus's Garden, a song that would eventually be featured on. In the meantime, back in London, Abbey Road band became aware of their need for him. Telegrams were received to him referring to him as the world's greatest rock and roll drummer, and even embellished his drum set with flowers after 2 weeks, but he came back. The band's togetherness was broken by becoming more profound as he entered the September 4, George Harrison studio. Had used flowers to adorn his drum equipment. Saying, "Welcome back," was a unique an act of generosity during a challenging period, but the issues persisted. Personal ties within the band had. Lennon was evolving into a more. His withdrawal from heroin use caused things to. Sometimes, the arguments were worse. Engineers from Abbey Road were even invited to. So that the band may quarrel, leave the room. Lennon had, in secret, by September 1969. Decided, he informed the others that he was calling it quits on the band. Divorce, but Alan, their manager of the business, clean persuaded him to remain silent. There were money matters to resolve. And a formal split might make things more difficult. For a long, the Globe continued to see them behind closed doors as the Beatles. They had already completed the Ringo. The split difficult because he had always been the relaxed one with a consistent presence in the gang now, even though he was disoriented during the. He had attempted to maintain peace in his last years. Between McCartney and Lennon, but it was unfathomable that their relationship had ended. Separate commercial disputes caused issues. Worse, McCartney desired Linda Eastman's father will oversee the group. No one was willing to give Alan clean to Lennon. Prepared to make concessions by 1970, it was. Every member of the Beatles completed. Went out of their way for Ringo, which implied demonstrating his independence, but rather than diving straight into rock music, he chose a different path with his initial Sentimental Journey. The album was published on March 27, 1970, was not an ordinary day. Debut, it was an assortment of vintage. The 1940s and 1950s standards tunes. Something he heard growing up in Liverpool. Wished to create a personalized item. That his family, including his mother, would enjoy the record, which was produced by George Martin. Bringing in famous arrangers such as Paul McCartney and Quincy Jones. Lee Eastman, father-in-law, the cover. Shown Ringo outside a. Critics of the Liverpool pub's homage to his origins. Didn't know what to believe, some termed. Others found it perplexing, but it was lovely. However, the album received mixed reviews. Soared to the top 10 in the UK and reaching the 22nd spot on the US Billboard rankings. Although it wasn't a huge hit, it demonstrated that Ringo was not afraid to take chances. In October 1970, later that year, he made a more audacious move in his second solo. Bocuse of Blues was an entirely country album. Nashville is where the music was recorded. Only 2 days with Pete Drake, the producer, and a group of top country music artists. The Buzz Rabin wrote the title track. Critics charted in the US and Germany. Commended Ringo's relaxed delivery. It was described as an excellent country single by Cashbox. The record didn't sell a lot of copies. But it revealed a different aspect of him. Was more than just the Beatles' drummer. He was an artist who experimented with. His favorite song was The True Breakthrough. Came in 1971, and Ringo released it in April. His first significant solo hit was Don't Come Easy. He and George co-wrote the tune. Harrison believed that Harrison wasn't. The lyrics were formally acknowledged as speaking, addressing themes of perseverance and trust that felt intimate with Harrison for Ringo, creating and including his unique slide. The song's guitar has a polished but sincere sound, reaching its highest point at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the US and achieved Canada's top spot. It even exceeded singles from his previous then arrived bandmates at the time. The image was made public in October. It was written by Ringo and Harrison in 1973, collaborating to create one of Ringo's most poignant tunes with narrative lyrics of the abundant production and the lost love made the song memorable. Top ranked in the United States and Canada and produced the top 10 in the United Kingdom that year. He obtained a second number 1 hit using Your 16, a Johnny Burnett cover from 1960. December 1973 saw its release, and became extremely successful in the early. In 1974, Carey appeared in the music video as Ringo's romantic interest. Pfizer adds a Ringo's mischievous touch was now obvious. Being a single star was a major factor in his 1973 album. Ringo was a triumph. Was his most prosperous solo endeavor and felt like all three of the Beatles getting back together. His old bandmates made some contributions. John Lennon's style when writing I'm the Greatest. George Harrison performed only for Ringo. Paul McCartney playing guitar on a number of tracks. Co-wrote and gave a performance at 6 o'clock, although he wasn't in the studio concurrently with the other producers of the record were Richard Perry and had a remarkable musicians on the bill, including Mark Bolan, Harry Nilsson, Billy Preston, and other members. It peaked at number 2 in the band's US and created 2 enormously popular photographs. As well as Your 16 reviewers lauded Ringo's charisma and the rock blend on the record. Catchy and poignant ballads, it was among the greatest achievements of any former Beatle. Ringo wasn't after the band disbanded. In addition to simply creating music, he acted in 1970 and co-starred with in the gloomy novel The Magic Christian, Peter Sears. Comedy centered on corruption and greed. Based on Terry Southern's book, the movie included cameos and a strange aesthetic from celebrities such as Raquel Welch and playing Youngman was Christopher Lee Ringo Grand, a billionaire's adopted son. Performed by Sellers, the movie received mixed reviews. However, Ringo's performance was received favorably, thus in 1981 he took the main part in the comedic comedy Cavemen. He performed a prehistoric comedy as a Tuck, a little yet astute caveman who challenges the film's savage chief of his tribe. Possessed outrageous jokes and a fictitious caveman. Even stop-motion dinosaurs and language. Despite the disapproval of reviewers, it became more importantly, it became a cult favorite. It had a personal impact on Ringo's life. How he got to know the actress while shooting. Barbara Bach, with whom they fell in love. Married shortly after the Beatles' release. Disbanded in 1970, Ringo's life took a. Despite the bad shift, success was still present. Was there another drink of alcohol? Became a regular element of his day, then a component of. His identity was more than just a few. He was engrossed in a world of excessive drinking. spending almost all of the evenings in clubs and recalling the performances that he delivered. Cocaine and marijuana were included in the mix as well. He later acknowledged that he was live in a daze and unable to remember the full occurrences, such as a performance he performed with the Beach Boys at home in Washington. His marriage wasn't getting any better. Cox had been with Morin for 10 years, but in 1975, the relationship ended. Began as a Ringo from a folk tale, and Morin had gotten married at the age of 18 in 1965. Together, they had 3 kids, but he was the one whose lifestyle tore them apart. Absent and disloyal, and getting worse into addiction, followed by something even George Harrison's more surprising. A former bandmate and close buddy fell in love. Love with Morin occurred at a dinner celebration in the middle of the night. George opened up with his feelings in front of. It wasn't only an embarrassing situation for everyone. The first moment of an affair. Despite being distraught, Ringo didn't blow up. Instead, he exclaimed angrily, "Better you as opposed to a stranger." Circumstance broke more than just his. Pattie Boyd, Harrison's wife, was devastated as well. She then replied in her own manner by going back to modeling job and engaging in her own affair. Ringo continued to drink even after the divorce. Only grew worse. He had joined the Hollywood vampires have a bad reputation for drinking. Alice Cooper Keith was a member of the club. Rock stars like Moon who lived for